All right, so we are still in Job chapter 20. It's Zophar is responding to Job. The basic thought he's trying to convey is that Job knows what happens to the wicked, that their period of exaltation or their period of joy in their wickedness is very short, and that God basically eliminates them, takes them out, judges them in some way in this, before their life is over. And since Job knows these things, why is he being so wicked? Why doesn't he just stop? An intelligent man would stop. That's a summary, I think, of what Zophar is trying to say here. And we started talking about it last week or the week before. I'm going to read chapter 20, then we're going to pick up somewhere in the middle, maybe actually at the beginning, somewhere around verse 9, I think is where we'll pick up after I read it. And again, there's only just a couple of basic parts to this. The first verse or two, he talks about um, why he's responding. And then he gives his thesis statement in verse 5. And then he kind of explains or gives examples of what he's talking about. And then at the end, the last verse, he gives a conclusion. So I'm going to read from the New International Version tonight.
Can
Then
you
Zophar,
post
yeah,
the link? I have just
yeah,
not been able to figure out how. You'll send the link and I'll bookmark it, but then when I click on it a week later, the latest, uh, your latest installment doesn't show up.
hmm,
It shows
okay.
Job 19 and a whole bunch of other stuff, but anyway,
Okay. So let me just also say this. If you get to Job 19, at the bottom of that document, there's a link to Job 20. And at the bottom of Job 20, there's a link to Job 21. And,
there is
etc.
not.
Well, it
I
could be,
believe it.
yeah, it could be true. All righty. So did you get the link? I just posted it. Did you get
Yeah.
that? Okay, good. All right. So NIV, Job 20. Then Zophar the Naamathite replied, my troubled thoughts prompt me to answer because I am greatly disturbed. I hear a rebuke that dishonors me, and my understanding inspires me to reply. Surely you know how it has been from of old, ever since mankind was placed on earth, that the mirth of the wicked is brief, and the joy of the godless lasts but a moment. Though the pride of the godless person reaches to the heavens and his head touches the clouds, he will perish forever like his own dung. Those who have seen him will say, where is he? Like a dream, he flies away, no more to be found, banished from a vision of the night. The eye that saw him will not see him again. His place will look on him no more. His children must make amends to the poor. His own hands must give back his wealth. The youthful vigor that fills his bones will lie with him in the dust. Though evil is sweet in his mouth and he hides it under his tongue, though he cannot bear to let it go and lets it linger in his mouth, yet his food will turn sour in his stomach. It will become the venom of serpents within him. He will spit out the riches he swallowed. God will make his stomach vomit them up. He will suck the poison of serpents. The fangs of an adder will kill him. He will not enjoy the streams, the rivers flowing with honey and cream. What he toiled for, he must give back uneaten. He will not enjoy the profit from his trading. For he has oppressed the poor and left them destitute. He has seized houses he did not build. Surely he will have no respite from his craving. He cannot save himself by his treasure. Nothing is left for him to devour. His prosperity will not endure. In the midst of his plenty, distress will overtake him. The full force of his misery will come upon him. When he has filled his belly, God will vent his burning anger against him and rain down his blows on him. Though he flees from an iron weapon, a bronze-tipped arrow pierces him. He pulls it out of his back, the gleaming point out of his liver. Terrors will come over him. Total darkness lies in wait for his treasures. Fire unfanned will consume him and devour what is left in his tent. The heavens will expose his guilt. The earth will rise up against him. A flood will carry off his house, rushing waters on the day of God's wrath. Such is the fate God allots the wicked, the heritage appointed to them by God. So verse 29 there kind of brackets with verse 5 where he says, this is what happens to the wicked. They don't enjoy what they get. They don't last very long. And then he gives all these long list of things that happen to the wicked. And I think he's not saying that all of these things happen to one wicked person. He's saying these are the things that happen to wicked people. He's given a whole list. I'm glad he's not trying to give a list of all the ways that God could judge the wicked because it would take up the rest of the Bible, right? If he just listed all of those. But as I was reading through this, I remembered a scene from the Blues Brothers. If you haven't seen it, you should see it because it's one of the great comedy movies. But the Blues Brothers, where Carrie Fisher, whatever character she's playing, Carrie Fisher and John Belushi uh, are together in this scene, and he is trying to give her reasons why he never showed up to marry her. He had proposed to her, they'd set a date, they'd gone to the church, or she'd gone to the church all dressed up. Her parents were there, 300 guests, and he never came, and she's trying to kill him throughout the movie because of it. And so he
Yes.
just gives yeah, he just gives her a litany of excuses, right? He says, I ran out of gas. I had a flat tire. I didn't have enough money for cab fare. My tux didn't come back from the cleaners. An old friend came in from out of town. Someone stole my car. There was an earthquake, a terrible flood. Locust, it wasn't my fault. And when,
My
One
God.
of the best scenes in the whole movie.
I know that was,
I've
that
never
was
seen
complete.
it.
That was
It's
completely ad-libbed by John Belushi too. It wasn't in the script. Um,
Oh,
and What a great scene. So anyway, when I'm reading Job 20, I'm reminded of that scene because this seems like what Zophar is doing. He's like just, you know, God will vent his anger against him and rain down his blows on him. Though he flees from an iron weapon, a bronze-tipped arrow pierces him. Terrors will come over him. Total darkness lies in wait for his treasures. A fire unfanned will consume him. The heavens will expose his guilt. The earth will rise up against him. A flood will carry off his house. It's like, just a whole list of various things that might happen, to the wicked. And so Zophar is, I don't know, trying to terrify Job with these pictures, but to me it just kind of comes off like, really, this is no new information. I mean, you already said God will judge the wicked, and then you don't need 17 different illustrations of that. Um, but yeah, so anyway, that was my impression today when I was reading through it. It's like, what? Oh yeah, that's what he's doing. He's doing that. So of note though is verse 19. Verse 19. In verse 19, I'm kind of not following the outline. I skipped over something. I'll go back to it. In verse 19 Zophar says, the wicked person who he's talking about, who he's thinking about, which he's talking about Job, right? It has no relevance to Job if he's not talking about Job. Job is the wicked person that he has in mind that God's going to do something like all these things to, and who needs to repent. Verse 19, he has oppressed the poor and left them destitute. He has seized houses he did not build. This is the only charge he makes against the wicked in this um, in this whole thing. He's done these things. He's oppressed the poor and he left them destitute. He seized houses he did not build. Is this true of Job? Job didn't do any of that.
no.
No, Job didn't do that. Job hasn't oppressed the poor. He's taken care of the poor. Job hasn't seized
Mhm.
houses he didn't build, right? He sheltered people. Job is, this is not about Job, but it's clearly, I mean, it's not true of Job, but Zophar is saying it as if Job is guilty of this, and that's why he should be worried that God's going to do these things, some of these things, maybe all of these things to him. And this this kind of introduces a new thing that the friends are going to do in there. There's only a couple more speeches left, so they're not going to really develop this. But the new thing is they're making stuff up. They're just making stuff up about Job here, and there's no reason for him to have said this. But it gets worse because after Job's response to Zophar, then Eliphaz speaks, and Eliphaz in his speech in Job 22, 6 through 9, says this about Job. You demanded security from your relatives for no reason. You stripped people of their clothing, leaving them naked. You gave no water to the weary, and you withheld food from the hungry. though you were a powerful man owning land, an honored man living on it, and you sent widows away empty-handed and broke the strength of the fatherless. So Eliphaz kind of, you know, the door's already open now. Zophar's opened the door to false accusations. Now Eliphaz is going to step through that, and he's got a whole list of things that Job has done, and they're trying to paint Job. Um, they're trying to see that they don't understand the circumstance, right? That's really clear. They don't understand what's going on, and now they're trying to convince themselves that what they're seeing must be happening because Job is a terrible person, but failing to see any terrible thing that Job has done. Now they're just attributing things to him that he hasn't done so that it'll fit with their false view of what's going on. And
I don't, what is these guys' rationale? Why are they saying all these things that aren't true? What's the motivation?
yeah, so I think the motivation is I think there's an unconscious, subconscious motivation to make reality conform to your worldview so you don't have to change it. So the worldview is the worldview demands that the person being punished be wicked. And so he must have done some wicked thing, right? Otherwise, he's not wicked. And so they can't find a particular wicked thing that he's done. And so I believe they just arbitrarily pick one, you know.
Make it a
Um,
cause and effect or something.
yeah, there may be something they're looking at, but it's like when the religious leaders accuse Jesus of things that Jesus hasn't done.
Mhm.
What's their motivation? Well, their motivation on one level is they want him eliminated because they're threatened by him and they think the Romans are going to take their position and all of that. But on another, I don't think, I think they actually think he deserves to die. And so they go, well, he's done something to deserve to die. He must have done something like this. So then they accuse him, blasphemy or whatever it is. Um,
Yeah. But at least
yeah,
in that case, uh, several times what the Pharisees accused him of doing or saying, particularly what he was saying, was true, but they just took it out of context.
yeah,
Oh, he said he would tear down this temple and blah blah blah.
yeah, yeah. So,
Or
why
even though
did,
he didn't say I will tear it down.
right, right. So, there could be something more to the accusations of Job's friends. Hi, Mom.
Hi.
I'm just talking a little bit about verse 19, uh, where Zophar says about Job, he has oppressed the poor and left them destitute. He has seized houses he did not build, which is clearly
Okay.
untrue, and how that kind of opens the door. So that's Job 20, verse 19. Let me put the
Yeah.
link just a second,
Job
Beth.
20. Oh, I don't have that one. Okay.
There's the link. Okay, Catherine, go
Thank
ahead.
you.
I believe you alluded to this very briefly recently in one of our classes. It was just, you just said it, brought it up. I could go through my notes and tell you when and exactly, but it's kind of like Don said, in the same vein, sort of. If you go to Job 2, beginning at verse 11 through verse 13, and you read about the richness of their friendship and the heartache they were feeling for Job. And I mean, it's love, 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 and sorrow for all of this for him. And I thought, whoa, this is profound. This is deep. This is wonderful, dear friendship and love. And then bang, you get this. So it is a stretch. It's like, yeah, you know what I'm trying to say, which of course, I struggle saying things sometimes, but it is from that point, chapter 2, verses 11 to 13, where you see these friends get off on a tangent, and you've discussed all the other aspects of their worldview as far as their worldview. That sums it up. And then, of course, Job's relationship, his love relationship, his affair, Job and God, completely polar opposites. So it can, if you kind of limit in between, you wonder how can things go from one extreme to the other. And that's all I wanted to say about it. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think that we've probably all had experiences with people that we love where, there's a misunderstanding of something that just continues for a long time, and it starts to affect the way you relate to that person. You start acting toward them like maybe you think they're slow or dumb or hard-headed or something like that, or maybe they think you are, and it starts to affect your relationship. Um, and what we have going on here throughout all this dialogue, which probably, we don't know how long it took. I'm thinking, a couple of months, probably, maybe longer. But these are just kind of highlights or lowlights, Um, but they're, it starts off with the friends and Job are each thinking about the other party. You're not listening. And then as time goes on, there's no evidence that either party is moving. So neither party is listening to the other. That's how that would be interpreted. And usually when that happens, there's one of two things happen. Either the dialogue dies because one party becomes silent, says, I have nothing to say, or I'm dumb, or you're not, or I'm not dumb, you're dumb. I'm not speaking to you anymore because you just aren't listening, so I'm not going to say anything. Or what usually happens is both parties just get louder, and as they get louder, they get more extravagant in their, like, they're trying to get the other person's attention. And what's going to happen here, Zophar has made this accusation. Job's not going to address it. And so Eliphaz then in the next chapter is going to expand on it. He's going to expand on that accusation and say, well, you must have done these other things too. He's going to accuse Job of a longer list. But after that, shortly after that, the dialogues just cease. People run out of Bildad, I don't even think has a third speech. And then Job says something for 3 or 4 chapters, and then Elihu comes in. So the dialogue, we're at the very end of it, really close to the end, and they're starting to, make stuff up and accuse him. So we can see it's deteriorated to this point. And Zophar makes no new, other than that, which is really not a helpful new thing. He doesn't make any advance in the conversation, and he doesn't say one new thing other than this false accusation. Everything he said so far has been the same, right? It's always been God punishes the wicked, and he does it in this life. And you can see that, Job, by looking around you. And so you should repent. Now there has been a change in how the friends have viewed Job over time. At the beginning, there was, we'll see this particularly when we get to Eliphaz's last speech, but in Eliphaz's first speech and his second speech, he told Job that God is disciplining him and God is correcting him, and he should submit to it and humble himself and just take it, right? And that God would restore him after he was done. But in Eliphaz's last speech, he's going to basically say that Job is wicked and God is punishing him. So he changes his view of Job. So we see what's happening with the viewpoints is they're getting further and further apart as the dialogue goes on. Right? Job is getting further apart in his viewpoint from his friends. They are moving away from the right viewpoint. And so the only place to go when you move away from the right viewpoint is, further away. So that's what's going on. But I found it interesting in verse 19 that he's accusing Job of something that Job doesn't do, hasn't done. And see, they're trying to the rationale for it is they want to have a, in their worldview, there's a one-to-one correspondence between doing something wrong and getting punished. And so he's getting punished in their worldview, and so he must have done something wrong. So I think the thought here is I'm going to accuse you of this thing, and since Job doesn't deny it, they're going to assume that it's true. So, um, yeah, so it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
So, Exodus 20 says we shouldn't give false witness, right? I think, I think here's an example of giving a false witness, right? So we want to watch out for that. So going back to verse 9 or 10. So 10, verse 10. So in verse 10, Zophar he brings in the children of the wicked person. This is particularly unfeeling at this point. We all can remember why. Job's children have all been killed. And so this is a unhappy reminder. Hey, Becky, how are
Hi,
you?
doing
Glad you
pretty
made it.
good. How are you?
Good, good. So I put the link in the chat there, and I'm
Is it
looking
the
at
outline
it
or the
is.
notes? It's the notes.
Yeah, it's first chapter 20.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm looking at verse, where am I? 10.
Yeah.
His children will seek the favor of the poor, and his hands will give back his wealth. So Zophar mentions children of the wicked. As I said, that's a pretty cruel thing to bring up at this point. He's accusing Job of being wicked and saying his children are going to have to give back all this wealth that he supposedly stole, from these people that he's taken advantage of. And then in verse, so he's again, like he's giving different things that could happen to the wicked. So one is when he dies, his children could seek the favor of the poor. So the scenario there would be Job has done these wicked things. God has him killed because of his wicked things. God kills him in some way, maybe a flood or an earthquake or something that he mentions later. And that as recompense, God makes his children seek out the people whom Job has abused and give them back the things that he stole. That's one thing that might happen. And another thing that could happen is that, like I said, he's just listing things. Verse 11. He goes on and says, his bones are full of his youthful vigor, but it will lie down with him in the dust. That is, he's youthful, he's strong, he's in his strength, but that's not going to prevent God from judging him. God could stop his life at any moment. In verses 12 and following, he talks about how the evil that he's done, his wickedness, and the gain he gets from that is something that he savors, but it's going to turn sour in his mouth and he's going to vomit it out. So he's going to give it back, or God's going to take it away from him. He won't be able to enjoy it. And there are several proverbs about that. And I wanted to read a couple of those. Let's see. Give me just a second. It looks like I'm in the wrong place. There. Right. So Proverbs 9:17. Stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. This is what Zophar is saying. In context, in Job there, in Proverbs, Proverbs chapter 9, verse 13 is part of the context that starts, the woman folly is loud, she is seductive and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house. She takes a seat on the highest places of the town, calling to those who pass by who are going straight on their way. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And to him who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. So this is lines up with what Zophar is saying. Zophar is saying that you're going to try to relish this thing that you've gotten from, ill-gotten wealth, and it's going to taste sweet but turn sour, and it will poison you and you will die. And this is basically this teaching here that you notice in the proverb, verse 15, the people who are they're going straight on their way. They're straight on the way. And she's calling them to turn off the way and to go a different way. And the way that they take goes down, those paths go down into Sheol, where the dead are. And so this is one of the proverbs that kind of backs up what Zophar is saying there. Proverbs 20:17 says, bread gained by deceit is sweet to a man, but afterward his mouth will be full of gravel. So there's nothing, as we've seen with the Friends' speeches, the thing that is wrong about them isn't the particular words that they use in most cases, except, where he's lying about Job, but the context. Zophar is trying to use these truths as proof that, or he's trying to fit them in the worldview that God always judges the wicked, and everybody that is experiencing difficulty is experiencing it because of their own sin as a punishment from God, and that in this world there's a one-to-one correspondence between wickedness and punishment. And so that at the end of your life, all justice has been done. Mm-hmm. And you can't make, you really can't do that. So in Ezekiel 3:3, speaking of eating something and having it turn sour, Ezekiel 3:3, and he said to me, Son of man, feed your belly with this scroll that I give you, and fill your stomach with it. Then I ate it, and in my mouth it was as sweet as honey. So this is the word of God that is being given to Ezekiel it's sweet to him, even though it's a bitter message that he has to deliver. Revelation 10:9 has kind of the opposite of that. So I went to the angel and told him to give me the little scroll. And he said to me, take and eat it. It will make your stomach bitter, but in your mouth it will be as sweet as honey. The message is distressing, the message of judgment that he's going to bring, but it is the word of God, so it will be sweet in his mouth. But ill-gotten gain tastes good, but makes you sick, is what what Zophar is saying. He also says that in verse 14 that it will become venom of serpents. The taste will be bad. In Deuteronomy 32, Moses' song, I think this is where this might come from. 32:33, starting in verse 31, says, their rock is not as our rock. So their God, the gods of Israel's enemies, are not like our rock, our God. Our enemies are by themselves. Our rock exists. Their rock is just a rock. For their vine comes from the vine of Sodom and from the fields of Gomorrah. Their grapes are grapes of poison. Their clusters are bitter. Their wine is poison of serpents and the cruel venom of asps. So the image that Zophar is using when he's saying that to Job that the wickedness that he's done, the evil, in Job 20, verse 12, says, though evil is sweet in his mouth, though he hides it under his tongue, though he is loath to let it go and holds it in his mouth, yet his food is turned in his stomach. It is the venom of cobras within him. saying that it's the fruit of wickedness. And so even though it seems like he's got it and he considers that a joyful thing, it's going to be bad for him. So biblical teaching put in the wrong context there. And then, sorry to be going back and forth. Talks about vomiting out. The Lord will make him vomit out what he has gained. This is reminiscent of Leviticus 18:28. The land will vomit you out when you make it unclean, as it vomited out the nation that was before you. God's talking to the Israelites going into Canaan. He's saying, if you forsake me, you participate in the sins of the Canaanites, become like them, the land will vomit you out just like it's vomiting them out. Now, the vomiting out of the Canaanites was at the hand of Joshua, basically. But the image there is that sin makes you sick. Sin brings destruction. It's self-defeating, self-destructive behavior. And so this is all being applied to Job here. It's obviously wrong to apply it to him, but the message itself is not wrong unless you're taking it in the context that Zophar means it in. In verses 20 and 21, it says that Zophar says that the wicked man cannot save himself with his treasure. We know that. Proverbs 11:4, riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. This is going to be Job's response, and it always has been, that he is righteous before God. He is innocent, and he hasn't done anything to deserve these things. And so he's not basing any of his standing before God on any of the things that God has given him in his life. Any of these things that his friends now say you got through wickedness. He's not basing his standing with God on any of those things. Job is going to say, I'm innocent. My heart is clean. I've done what God has told me to do. I don't understand what's happening. So he also believes that riches don't profit, right? That he can't stand before God and go, look I'm a wealthy man, or I was a wealthy man. Zephaniah 1:18, neither their silver nor their gold shall be able to deliver them on the day of the wrath of the Lord. In the fire of his jealousy, all the earth shall be consumed. For a full and sudden end he will make of all the inhabitants of the earth. So, we know this teaching. This is very clear. Zophar is not saying anything. Technically, his words aren't unbiblical. They're just really unhelpful and kind of distorted. So in the time of his plenty, Zophar goes on to say, God will pour out his wrath on him. God will strike him mortally. Job's iniquity and guilt will be exposed for everyone to see. That's verse 27. And all of his treasure will be consumed, so he will not enjoy any of it. And Zophar calls it the day of God's wrath in verse 28. So when he has filled his belly, God will vent his anger against him, verse 23. Psalm 73:18 and 19 says about God, truly you set them in slippery places. You make them fall to ruin. How they are destroyed in a moment, swept away utterly by terrors. This is about the judgment of the wicked. God puts them in places where their foot slips and they're destroyed, swept away in terrors. It sounds like something Zophar could have said, right? He said these very same sentiment. And I think when the Psalm is talking about it, it's giving us a picture of the wicked's unstable and unsteady place before the Lord. And like Jonathan Edwards said, using a passage from Deuteronomy that basically says the same thing. Jonathan Edwards says, it's only God's mercy that keeps the wicked out of hell every second, right? That he could withdraw his mercy and they would plunge straight down into hell. And that's what the verse is talking about. God doesn't destroy all the wicked in this manner during this life, but certainly a day will come, or on the last day, they will all be destroyed in a moment. So in Daniel 4:31, while the words were still in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you. And Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom then was taken away in a moment there. So this is an example of one of the judgments that happens, a temporal judgment, something like what Zophar imagines happens to everybody. But I would have to say that he hasn't really been paying attention, to what's been going on in the world around him. Right? I think that's the most intriguing thing for me, surprising thing for me, is that the worldview of Zophar and his friends only works when you're talking among yourselves. But as soon as you go outside and start observing what's happening, how can you say that all the wicked are judged before they die, or judged in this life? That there is not one wicked person who dies happy and rich. How can you say that? It's like, I don't, anyway, the amount of blinders you would have to put on to be able to maintain that worldview in the actual world, it's astounding. Does anybody else, I mean, would it be easy to maintain that worldview, do you think?
Don't you think they
No.
have blinders on because they have the worldview? Wouldn't you consider that someone that's got blinders on in
Oh,
regards
yeah.
to almost everything?
Yeah, they'd have to. Yeah, they'd have to
It
willfully
feels like
blind themselves. Yeah.
Yeah,
it
okay.
it feels like Zophar is weaponizing scripture. He's cherry picking
Mm,
and using it as a weapon directed at Job rather than instructional for the whole world.
Well, it's a good thing nobody cherry picks it anymore, huh?
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no evidence of that happening in
Yeah.
today's world.
Yeah, we don't
Yeah.
have any more of that. Oh,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, I think you're right, Becky. And you have to do that to maintain a skewed worldview, right? Because there are some things in the Bible that won't fit in that worldview, and so you either have to ignore them or explain them away.
Yeah.
And it's like Gary said, thank God there's no problem with people having to ignore the biblical worldview anymore or explain things away. Um,
Yeah.
I think that's a problem. Obviously that's a problem we all have. It's the thing that we battle the most in our own lives. The sin would continually want us to ignore things in the Bible and continually explain away things that, or rationalize that doesn't appeal, that doesn't apply to me, or my situation is different. It's not really addressed here. Something like that. Uh, we all make the same sinful. We build blinders. It's what we do.
We all live in a great state of denial.
Yeah.
I mean, we're a lot of times we're just not even aware of it until an event has passed and you turn around and look and go, oh my gosh, was that really me?
Yeah. So regarding Zophar and the worldview he represents, I'm sure that if I were to have a conversation with Zophar, that he would be able to give me endless examples. He could go on for a long time, giving me examples that all substantiate his worldview. And all it takes to refute it is one counterexample, right? And I would be able to give one counterexample, anyone. And then the response would be, I think, you don't know that in their last moment they were happy. You don't know that they, still were feeling at peace or anything like that. You don't know. All these terrors came upon them. My worldview says all these terrors came upon them in the last moment. And so they must have. And so there would be the attempt at justification, right? At any anything that looks like it doesn't fit. And that's something we would all do, right? Because then I would come back with something and try to justify what I just said. And
All of his friends are rich also, right?
yeah, they would.
Yeah, so they're protecting their class also,
Right.
perhaps.
Oh yeah, no, there's definitely, and I know that Mike Bunnell had brought that up a couple of times, that there's a kind of a self-interest uh, angle here where they're wealthy, and wealth, they're taking it as a sign of God's blessing,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
there's nothing happening to them like nothing's happening to deplete their wealth, and no bad things are happening to them, so they're taking that as a sign that they're righteous and everything they've done is righteous. So thankfully, they don't use that as an argument very often. We have money now and you don't, therefore we're righteous and you're not. But it does seem to be part of their worldview. Yeah.
Well, since they and their friends are probably all rich, they're probably not looking for counter examples.
Right. Yeah. And Job's gonna, try to give some, and the dialogue's going to end shortly thereafter, I think. And he's been giving some examples, but yeah. Um, let's see, what did I just do? All right, so I wanted to make a comment on Job 20:24-26, talking about arrows and fire. The passage says, Zophar says, he will flee from an iron weapon, a bronze arrow will strike him through. It is drawn forth and comes out of his body, the glittering point comes out of his gallbladder. Terrors come upon him. Utter darkness is laid up for his treasures. A fire not fanned will devour him. What is left in his tent will be consumed. So, arrows and fire. This is Psalm 21, 8-12. Your hand, talking to God, your hand will find out all your enemies. Your right hand will find out those who hate you. You will make them as a blazing oven when you appear. The Lord will swallow them up in his wrath, and fire will consume them. He will destroy their descendants from the earth and their offspring from among the children of man. Though they plan evil against you, though they devise mischief, they will not succeed, for you will put them to flight, and you will aim at their faces with your bows. So, fire and arrows, the Lord's judgment is spoken of as both of those things. And this sounds like a passage, again, that would support Zophar. And, one of the things that I mentioned a couple of times is how a person's worldview will to be consistent with your worldview, everything that you believe in your worldview, has to line up with it. So that's a tautology, I guess. Anyway, so we read a passage like this in the Psalms, Psalm 21, 8-12. And we read it, and if we were Zophar, we would read this and say, this is going to happen to every single wicked person, and I'm going to be able to see it. If I just, pay attention, I'll be able to see that this is what's actually happening right here in this life. That's Zophar's worldview. We have a different worldview, I think. I think our worldview is that this tells me that God will ultimately judge all people, but not necessarily in this life. And so we're both reading in this hypothetical situation, we're both reading the same text, and the text has a meaning, and it only has one meaning. It doesn't mean both of those things, right? And so the question then becomes, the question about what does the text mean actually is a question about which worldview is right, or which worldview is closer to being the biblical worldview. That's always the question. And so I would say with confidence that the correct understanding of a passage like this is that God will judge all the wicked, not necessarily in this life, because that's what I see being taught throughout the entire Bible. Uh, but but you can see by reading this how somebody can come up with Zophar's worldview. So because he's, it's that thing about quoting sources, right? Zophar is saying something that is only true on a surface level. If I interpret it according to my worldview, to the biblical worldview, what Zophar is saying is true because it sounds exactly like this. But in Zophar's worldview, if I interpret it according to his worldview, what he's saying is not true. That's always an interesting problem, I think. So in verse 27, Zophar says, the heavens will reveal his iniquity, and the earth will rise up against him. I think this is a kind of a response to Job 16, 18 to 19, where Job says, O earth, cover not my blood, and let my cry find no resting place. Even now, behold, my witness is in heaven, and he who testifies for me is on high. Zophar takes these words and he says that would be a really bad thing. God exposed, if he didn't cover over, your sin, if you weren't, but he's going to expose you. He's going to expose all your wickedness, not going to cover you. So he's twisting what Job is doing. And then in verse 27 again, he says that the heavens and the earth basically are testifying against Job. The heavens will reveal his iniquity. The earth will rise up against him. Heavens and earth testifying against him. And this is another biblical idea. Deuteronomy 4:26, Moses says, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that you will soon utterly perish from the land that you are going over the Jordan to possess. You will not live long in it, but will be utterly destroyed. This is one of the passages that I read, and I conclude that sometimes that this I guess I'll start from the other end. So the way that this is fulfilled, right? How long did it take for this fulfillment, for this to happen? That the Israelites perished from the land. So that took from the time that Joshua entered the land to the time that the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and the temple and sent the people into exile. That's a long time.
Yeah.
That's several hundred years, probably 1,000 years, over 1,000 years. I don't have it in my head, but Moses was around 1400, so Joshua's like 1350. Destruction of Babylon was 580, so it was that 800 years?
Yeah.
This is 800 years. Does this sound like this is going to be 800 years? Doesn't it sound like it's talking to the present generation? It's these guys who went into the promised land and then shortly thereafter failed to drive out the enemies and started to marry the people and take on their customs and started to be idolaters. And I mean, it's within 100 years of going into the land that everything starts falling apart, right? But God doesn't wipe them out completely. They were not utterly destroyed. They were not driven from the land. The passage sounds like, I mean, you could read it and go, this is going to happen immediately. And that's the way Zophar would take something like this. Going to happen immediately. But it doesn't. There's a progressive losing of the land. It takes a long time. They are losing the land. From the moment they start to disobey God, they start losing the land. And it culminates 800 years later, right? So anyway, the point I'm making is that Zophar would read this as this is going to happen. He's saying the people I'm talking to, it's going to happen in your generation. But the way that we read it is he's speaking to you, God's people, that if you forsake the Lord, he will forsake you, and he will do it in his time and in his own way. Doesn't actually need to be immediately or anything like that. So, but anyway, I went to this passage because so calling heaven and earth as witness, like Zophar was doing. A couple more passages about that. Deuteronomy 31, 28, 29. Assemble to me all the elders of your tribes and your officers, that I may speak these words in their ears and call heaven and earth to witness against them. For I know that after my death you will surely act corruptly and turn aside from the way that I have commanded you. And in the days to come, evil will befall you, because you will do what is evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger through the work of your hands. And that's certainly true. And the Lord was angry with them for several generations. Uh, Moses calls heaven and earth to witness, right? This is what Zophar is doing too. Heaven and earth have witnessed your wickedness. God's going to expose it. Isaiah 26:21. For behold, the Lord is coming out from his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for iniquity. The earth will disclose the blood shed on it, and will no more cover its slain. And this goes back to the actual wording that Job used. Don't let the earth cover over my blood. And Zophar saying, well, God is going to expose you, right? So he's thinking about this type of a teaching, this type of a biblical teaching that there will be a day of reckoning when all sins are seen and when all the good things that people have done by God's Spirit will be rewarded. And those things are veiled today. We don't see perfect justice in either the good being rewarded or the wicked being punished. And in fact, I don't even think it's possible for us to see. We would not be able to recognize perfect justice because we don't know what the extent of a person's rebellion is, or the extent that they have humbled themselves and pleased the Lord in obedience. We don't know these things. And so we wouldn't be able to see perfect justice. The only way to see perfect justice is on that final day when the curtain is pulled back and everybody can see. There's no more hiding, nothing hidden. God will expose all the secrets of our hearts and all the deeds, and those who will be rewarded or punished. And of course, if you're in Christ, that will be brought to light too. And all of us in Christ will receive the reward that he has earned for his obedience, and we will not face the punishment that we earned for our disobedience, because he already did that. So that's good news, I think. So
Amen.
Indeed.
yeah. So Zophar doesn't add anything new. He uses a lot of biblical ideas. He accuses Job wrongly. His thesis statement to me is absurd. The thesis being that God always punishes the wicked in this life, and he does it quickly. And Job, if you look out your window and look at the wicked, you could see that. I just wonder what fantasy world Zophar must be living in, to to think that. But on the other hand, having said it that way, on the other hand, I think when we're kids, we have an idea that things should be fair and things should be just. And we expect it to be just and fair. We expect the world to be just. And one day, one of our parents says to us, let me just explain this. The world is not fair, right? But we have from God ingrained in us this expectation of justice, this expectation of fairness. So from that point of view, I can understand Zophar's worldview. He's just never matured to the point of actually seeing the world isn't fair. one of the reasons the world is so demonstrably not fair is so that we can be reminded that justice and the end of suffering and all of the things that God has promised are still in the future. That those we can be assured that there is a day of judgment when God will make everything right, because it's not his plan to make it right now. And that's clear. It's very clear. And that is the big separation of Zophar's worldview with the biblical worldview and with Job's worldview. So that brings us, I think, to the end of chapter 20. I had a little table, but we don't need to go through it, where the NIV seems to say things a little bit more clear than the ESV. But we're at the end and we have a few minutes, does anybody have anything you want to add to this, or anything at all you want to say?
No.
So
No.
lots of Zophar's ideas are biblical, but the Bible isn't written at this time, so he's not studying anything in the
Yeah,
Bible.
he's not quoting these things, right? He is saying these things from, well, there's a couple of options, right? So I think one option, my take on it is what's happening. Zophar knows these things about God is holy, God is just, and we are not. He knows these things, that sin separates us from God and is wicked and evil, and that God's judgment is on sin. And he's seen examples of God's judgment on sin in the world. And so I think he's speaking from his creational constitution, the way God has made him to know God and to know God's holiness and righteousness and justice. And so he is, speaking about from that point of view. And so you could say that from natural revelation, Zophar is able to understand these things. And I think that's what Romans 1 says, that we're at least able to understand God is holy, we're not, we're under his wrath, he's going to judge us. And that we can see instances of that in history. The other thing is that it's possible, although I would not make any doctrine reliant on this statement, but it's possible that biblical prophets or it's possible that God spoke to people and revealed things to people that those people are not, what God revealed to them is not written in the Bible. So, for instance, it's possible that God said things to the Apostle Paul that Paul did not write down in the Bible, when Jesus was speaking with him. And, be that as it may, those things would be true. But, as far as this brings up the debate between Roman Catholics, right? Because they're saying, well, God said some things that aren't in the Bible, and that's what tradition is. So I'm saying those things are not, they're not part of Scripture, and that's what God has given his church to guide them. So there could be things that God has said that people knew because God had said it, but they're not written down in the Bible. Just later on, in later revelation, they get written down, like David writes a psalm or Proverbs get written or something like that. And the same content is in those psalms or Proverbs. So anyway, I'm not even sure if that option was worth bringing up, but it seems to be a possibility.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Let me turn off the recording.